Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association Antitrust Law section. My name is John Roberti, and today's topic is the next big thing: understanding the intersection of blockchain and antitrust. Now, blockchain is a term that we hear and is, I think, largely understood in the antitrust bar. Many of us hear that term and say we think we kind of know what it is, and we sort of pretend that we know what it is. But it's a little more complicated, and importantly, also, there's a question about how does antitrust play into the whole development in blockchain. Well, today we're going to explore what is blockchain and try to figure out where the emerging antitrust issues may come from. My host today is Sergei Zaslavsky. Hi, Sergei.
Hi, John.
Sergei, what are we doing today?
Well, we're talking about a blockchain. I know it's something that sounds cool. Everybody's heard it's the next disruptive technology, the next internet, yada, yada, yada. But what does it really mean? What does it really do? We will start with these basic questions and then explore how it interacts with the field we all know and love.
All right, and who's our guest today?
We're talking to Thibault Schrepel, one of the world's leading experts in the intersection of blockchain and antitrust. He is an associate professor at VU Amsterdam, a faculty affiliate at Stanford's Codex Center, and has a new book out called Blockchain plus Antitrust, the Decentralization Formula. Welcome to the program, Thibault.
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is blockchain?
Sure. I'm tempted, based on the introduction that you gave, to do the lawyer trick, which is to explain what blockchain is not. Because you mentioned disruptive innovation, I could say, well, it is not, because it is not creating a market or disrupting a industry, but the entire economy, such as we know it, or at least that's the potential. The next internet, well, you could say no, because blockchain is doing to transaction what internet did to information. But not to use that trick for any longer, and to give you, not the official definition, but at least my understanding of it and the way that I use the term in the book. I see blockchain as a database with very specific characteristics. And when you do mention those and explain those, which I'm about to do, here what we are talking about, and that's a term that you may see here and there, is the blockchain layer 1, which again relates to that database. So you could just visualize an Excel sheet with the characteristics that I will tell you about in just a second. So characteristics number 1, a blockchain is decentralized, which relates to control. So who controls that database? You could say no one or everyone, meaning that no single user can take some information out of the database on her or his own. Characteristic number 2, blockchain is distributed, which relates to the location of the data, the location of the database. And there, it's quite easy. If you do want to download a copy of the entire ledger of a blockchain, the entire database, then you can do that. This is true for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the blockchain that we'll be discussing today. Characteristic number 3, blockchain are immutable, meaning that you cannot, once you've put some information, take it out. This has to do with the structure and a bit of the encryption, maybe a bit too technical and not so relevant when it comes to antitrust. So I won't go into that. And characteristic number 4, blockchain are pseudonymous, meaning that if you use a blockchain to transact, it is not your real life identity that appears, but your blockchain identity, or as we call it, the public key. So those are the 4 characteristics of that database. And what is very important, especially I think for antitrust lawyers, is that on top of that layer 1 database, the layer 1 of the blockchain, you can put any software or application that you want if the code allows you to do that, which is not true for the Bitcoin blockchain, but true for the Ethereum and all the blockchains. And so there you can make a distinction between 3 different types of applications that could run on top of blockchain. The first one are cryptocurrencies. And it has to be the first because blockchain and cryptocurrencies, namely Bitcoin, were introduced at the same time in the same paper. The second one, and we will be discussing that, I'm sure, are smart contracts, which are potential transactions to be triggered in the future. So I could say, if it rains, then you get a Bitcoin. If you sell a product, then I do that as your competitor, etc., etc. And the third type of application are anything else. So anything that we call the sharing economy could actually be shared for real and function on top of a blockchain, take the data there, put some more data. So it could be the equivalent of any of the company, the big tech companies, but also startup that we know about, could run in the decentralized, distributed, immutable, and pseudonymous way. So this is kind of, I think, what you need to understand to then be able to discuss the antitrust matter in the space.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit. And sometimes the reality is a little more prosaic than our imagination. When you say blockchain, people think of this, something really exotic and exciting. And as you explained, it is basically a database, an immutable, decentralized, anonymous, distributed database. Why is it that having a database with these four characteristics has the potential, as you said, to revolutionize our economy, to really change so many ways in which we go about our lives and our business? What's the big deal?
So first of all, I should say that what I'm about to say right now is just a prediction, or at least my understanding of it. Evidently, should I know exactly how to use blockchain to transform the entire economy, I will probably be creating a startup as we speak and about to become a billionaire. But the assumption is that the fact that you can run such a database, which then allows you to transact without any intermediary, or at least without the intermediaries such as we know them already, could change the entire game. So it means that I could send some money to you without a bank in the middle. I could do a transportation service without a company in the middle, etc., etc. And that is something which is kind of new. I say kind of because blockchain is not coming out of the blue. It combines technologies that have existed for a long time, coming from the cypherpunks, etc. But in the new form, in the form such as we call it, blockchain, it appears in 2008. And what is new with the combination of those existing technologies is that you can actually solve what has been labeled as the Byzantine generals problem, which is that you can coordinate and trust that the database is actually accurate without a intermediary in the middle. And that has been the reason why we do have intermediaries, trustful partners that we know we can rely upon. And you do not need any for the blockchain, because the system is made in such a way that you can trust that if it says you do have a Bitcoin, it is true. If someone is sending a Bitcoin to another person, you know the transaction will be triggered, and no one can actually prevent that from happening. So it gives, in a sense, power back to the users, although it's not that easy, but that's the general idea. And potentially why this is a fascinating subject when it comes to antitrust. Well, if you get rid of most intermediaries, then it means that you get rid of most of the practices that they can implement by definition. But it does not mean that antitrust is not relevant to blockchain, far from that. But this is a bit of a new paradigm, I guess, in the space.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about disintermediation of the economy, that is a big deal. Could you kind of tell us, where are we with this? If you think about the internet, the last technology that truly revolutionized the world, for decades, it was kind of, just used for military, academic application. Nobody knew much about it. Then mid to late 90s, starts getting into the mainstream. Everybody gets an AOL account. Then 5 to 10 years after that, it completely transforms the way we use information, the way we communicate, the way we do commerce. Where are we on that adoption curve with blockchain? Have we had our AOL moment yet? Are we nearing it? What's going on?
I think it's fair to say that it goes much faster than what happened with the adoption of the internet or the cyberspace. Indeed, it was just created 11 years ago. And yet now we know that a third, I think, of the Americans used the money that they got from the coronavirus, the COVID crisis, to invest in Bitcoin, and the adoption is actually going fast. I'm not sure if we should actually be looking for what some people have called the killer app, or the killer use of blockchain, because it kind of presumes that the evolution of blockchain is not following a Darwinian system, where the systems improve slowly and slowly becomes more adopted. So at least that's my way of seeing it. I'm not too sure if, one day we'll wake up and a new blockchain application will just make it, available to the entire planet. But when it comes to the adoption, to be very concrete, I think we have to look at the private adoption. And there I could give the name of many, many companies, and I won't, but just Google that. You can find easily a few companies using blockchain to improve their processes. I can tell you that some of them are using it to track where the product is, or to trace food, or to sell some airplane parts, etc., etc. So this is the private adoption. As far as the public adoption goes, we have lots of countries who are using blockchain to implement voting systems or digital IDs, sovereign identity. So a few countries: Canada, Mexico, United States, Argentina, France, Denmark, the United Kingdom, Ukraine, Switzerland. I mean, there are lots and lots of countries, and I'm sure my list is not even up to date. And just one thing, I've talked about the second type of blockchain application, smart contracts. And there, I think what you see, it is an exponential growth of the use of smart contracts. Just some numbers on one of the blockchain, the Binance blockchain. Smart contracts have been called 1.4 billion times just in the month of May of 2021. So this is, I guess, quite a lot. Probably nothing if you compare that with Visa or MasterCard or, the centralized way of transacting, but still quite a lot. For the Ethereum blockchain, 20,000 smart contracts are created daily. And those smart contracts are being called then for an indefinite period. And in just the month of May of 2021, 130 million smart contracts have been called on that blockchain to decentralize transactions. So this is a bit of what's happening in the space. Again, it's really hard to keep track, which I think is a positive sign. But the least we can say is that the adoption is going as some people thought it will go. And something, if I just may briefly say that, I think it is not so cool anymore to be a blockchain skeptic and to say that this is just a Ponzi scheme and that it will go away in just 1 or 2 years. Some people have said that, as people have said that for the internet, including Paul Krugman and some others. But it seems that it won't go away anytime soon. Maybe it will eventually, but not anytime soon.
Well,
I happen to know that there are section members that still have AOL email accounts, for what it's worth, so that the internet did not go away anytime soon.
Well, and on that, we will be discussing NFTs maybe, but I'm sure that you could sell your AOL email accounts for quite a lot of money, because it is now, a collectible in a sense. So
kind of like bell-bottom jeans or something. Why is it called blockchain? Where does that name derive from?
Sure. Again, I think I'm not actually sure who coined the term blockchain for the first time. What I can tell you is that in Satoshi Nakamoto's paper about Bitcoin, is actually, or she, or they, or it is explaining what blockchain is as a concept without using the term blockchain for the first time. So I suppose it appeared probably a bit before Satoshi Nakamoto, but it comes from the fact that the way the infrastructure is designed is the following: you have a bunch of transactions being implemented on the blockchain. They are then being combined into a block. That block is being assigned an identity. And the trick is that you will record the identity of block number 1 onto block number 2 once you have more transactions coming in. And in a sense, it creates then a chain of blocks. And that is why a blockchain is immutable. Should you want to get rid of any information in, let's say, block number 1, if you are a very skilled hacker, potentially you could do that. But what happens if you do that is that the identity of block number 1 will be changed, But because the original identity of that block was recorded onto block number 2, then it created a mismatch, and your version of the blockchain is put away from the system. So that's pretty much the logic underlining blockchain. And again, that is why we call it blockchain or chains of blocks. In France, we have to, by law, we have to convert every English term into French language for the legislative purposes. And so blockchain has been translated into chaîne de blocs. But yes, this is where it comes from, actually.
The question I have, and again, is where do we see lots and lots of regulatory risks that could come out of blockchain, or at least I think regulators, at least in the US, are trying to figure it out. I haven't heard a whole lot about antitrust regulators thinking about issues in the blockchain world. Where do you see some of those issues coming out?
So indeed, just a few agencies have been published, and or just if not just a few footnotes on the topic. The French Competition Agency, in the month of, I would say, July 2021, something like that, published a report on fintech, which is decentralized finance. The Swedish Competition Agency also published a report on blockchain and antitrust, I would say in 2018 or 19, probably 19. But indeed, there aren't many cases. There are quite a few cases, but before the courts, not before the competition agencies. I am, of course, in touch with most competition agencies to try to see if something's happening. I received some very specific questions regarding, how blockchain could be used to infringe Section 2 of the Sherman Act, for instance, or Article 1 or 2, refusal to deal and rebates and all that. So I guess there are some ongoing investigations, but nothing public yet. But something I can tell you is that when I do discuss with them, they are keen to understand blockchain from a technical perspective, which I think is exactly what we need. Not to all become computer scientists, but to at least get a sense of what's happening so that we can reach the level of understanding necessary to understand legal issues. And most of the agencies I've been discussing with, if not all of them, are very much interested in understanding blockchain and see that as potentially a major issue for the future. And something concrete, the former Attorney General for the Antitrust Division actually put out a speech in August of 2020 in which he underlined that blockchain will become a big issue for the field of antitrust, but also potentially something that antitrust agencies should embrace because it could actually help them in reaching certain objectives.
So let's dive into that a little more. What are some of the specific ways that kind of the spread of blockchain can affect antitrust? I know in your book, for instance, you talk about smart contracts and collusion. What is the relationship there? Is there any greater risk of collusion when people use smart contracts? What should antitrust practitioners and regulators be thinking of in that area?
Sure. So again, when we talk about smart contracts, we talk about potential transactions which are being recorded onto the blockchain. Once they are there, they cannot be deleted from the blockchain. And if the conditions are met, then those smart contracts will be triggered automatically. There is a computer and node triggering the transactions, but there is nothing you can do. If the conditions are met, the smart contract is being triggered. And so the reason why I think this is relevant for competition agencies, and especially in the field of collusion, is that we do know from empirical work that there are two aspects for companies to be able to sustain collusion. One is the social aspect, meaning that you have to trust the other colluders, that they will not go to the agency and apply for leniency, etc., etc. And the other one is the economic aspect. You have to trust that in staying in the cartel, you can gain more than if you were to leave the cartel and just compete with the other firms because you are much better than those firms. And it seems to me that smart contract could help on both fronts because you know that a smart contract will be triggered no matter what. And it seems to me that the effect of that is that collusions are becoming cooperative games in a sense, meaning that you can force the other colluders to behave in a certain way by way of smart contracts. And that might be interesting for colluders, unfortunately, although, I mean, we should disclose that we are not here to explain how to create perfect collusions. But it seems to me that indeed, you know that, for instance, if a company deviate from the price agreement, then by way of smart contract, you could punish the deviation. If you punish the deviation, then it's the way to prevent deviation in the first place. And if you prevent deviation, then you prevent most collusions from exploding, because we know from empirical work that they explode when a company is deviating from the price, mainly. So that's a way to strengthen collusions. It might also be that if a company applies for leniency, you will punish the company by way of smart contract. So I'm not here to say that it is the perfect way of organizing cartel and that they will last forever, but it seems to me that they will be way stronger for the time when they are being implemented. And so for that reason, it seems to me that smart contracts and collusion is a natural field for competition agencies to explore, maybe more than it is for monopolization or abuses of dominance, where you do not have any trust relationships. By definition, what you do is that you abuse your power against other economic agents. And so blockchain could be relevant, but not necessarily the use of smart contract, which is a trust mechanism and a trust technology in a sense.
So let me ask one follow-up there. So it does seem like smart contracts could help colluders by solving the trust problems that, cartels tend to fall apart because of misunderstandings. But cartels usually also try to avoid detection. If you have this permanent immutable contract saying we are going to run our cartel this way, it seems it's not exactly a smoke-filled room. Most conspirators would not want to use something that makes it so easy for them to get caught. Is there really something that you could see being used by cartels, even though detection seems to be a real issue there?
So I think, let me put it this way. I think I'm aware of a few companies using smart contract as we speak to collude. And something which was very surprising, and if you do not trust what I'm about to say, because it seems to be such, a weird paradox that I stumbled upon, that you could check it out yourself. But in the very early days of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto and other people, so Satoshi Nakamoto, by the way, is the person or the robot, we do not know, who invented Bitcoin. They were discussing antitrust and saying, well, you know what, very convenient to use blockchain and smart contract. I mean, smart contract did not exist at the time, but to transact using blockchain, because it might be a way to escape antitrust regulators. And if we cannot escape, they cannot do anything against us because it is decentralized. So I was fascinated to see that antitrust was somewhere on the back of their mind. But to answer your question, I think, and you will see that in the book, I do explain that it is not, in a sense, I think we need the help of psychologists here in the space. Because from a technical perspective, you could actually design a smart contract in which you introduce a chameleon hash or any other technology. And here again, I don't want to be too technical, but that would basically allow you to delete the smart contract once the transaction has been triggered. So should you want to use a smart contract and protect yourself from detection, it is kind of possible, at least if we talk about agencies being proactive and entering blockchains to detect collusion. That is possible from a technical point of view. However, I am not too sure if indeed people will feel like it and wouldn't just fear blockchain because we hear so much that blockchain is immutable, which it is, that they would just say, you know what, I do not trust the mechanisms to avoid immutability, and I will simply try to avoid using smart contracts. So we'll see. It might be that people are just overconfident, and when they implement a cartel, they never think the cartel will end, and therefore they will use smart contract, or they may fear immutability, in which case they won't. Something I do want to mention, though, when it comes to detecting cartels using smart contract or any other type of technology, it is that if the cartel is successful, prices will go up, or market will be divided, or whatever the effect may be, and that is visible outside the blockchain, right? So it remains possible for agencies to start investigations outside blockchain and do a down raid and eventually size the computer and enter the blockchain this way. The other way around, starting from the blockchain to detect a cartel, I think will be very complex.
So let's look at it from the other side of the coin, just so we don't turn our show into a how-to for antitrust violators. Let's talk about how blockchain could potentially help the good guys, the antitrust enforcers. Is there a way that blockchain can actually aid antitrust enforcement?
Sure, many ways. And again, I mean, those are just some prospective analysis, and I'm sure that and I hope that in a few years from now, I will realize that I missed the big picture and that blockchain was even more helpful than what I thought at the time. But on the substance, as I mentioned already at the very beginning of our conversation, if you get rid of most intermediaries, then it means that you get rid of the practices going with those intermediaries. And therefore, most of the infringement to antitrust will go away, which is why I think the end objective of blockchain and antitrust is kind of the same. And here I will try to my best to avoid the debate regarding whether antitrust should protect consumers or total welfare. But regardless of what you think should be the target of antitrust, we kind of agree, and this is rare to have a consensus in the space, but it seems to me that there is a consensus that antitrust is about freeing economic transaction and getting rid of coercions when it comes to transactions on the market. And the same is true for blockchain. And so that I think is interesting, especially when we tackle the infringements made by blockchain to antitrust, because it means that potentially we want to do it in a way to preserve blockchain, because again, it may help reaching the same or a similar objective than the one of antitrust agencies. So that is for the substance. And on a very practical matter, we know that we detect very few infringements to antitrust, between 13 and 17% from some empirical studies done quite a long time ago, actually. But still, it means that 80% of the time, if you infringe antitrust, you'll be fined, most likely, unfortunately. And so that is where blockchain could help in, again, decentralizing the economy, which means that you have less to detect, et cetera, et cetera. That is for the substance. For the form and the procedures, we could indeed envision that competition agencies will use blockchain, for instance, in the context of merger control, to ask that the company register all the relevant information into private blockchains that only them can access, so that when they apply and notify a merger, they cannot take some information away from the database the day before they will notify the merger. The European Commission is complaining about that on a regular basis, fining companies as well. Blockchain could be used to solve that a little bit. With smart contract, you could also force remedies and make sure that remedies will be implemented when the cost of compliance and monitoring will go down. So there are some things we could think about. The long-term vision that I develop in the book might be that we may also decentralize competition agencies one day using blockchain, and I explain how prediction markets functioning on top of blockchain could function. But I realize this is far stretch and something for a long distant future. So something we could do is indeed to start using blockchain, so that the data going from agencies to companies and companies to agencies will actually be more trustful in nature.
It's interesting because when we think about the internet and going way back, it's never really been the internet technology itself that has been the cause of antitrust problems. It's been the application of the technologies on top of it that have been, I think it took a while for people to sort of really understand, but I think now there is a prevailing view among the enforcers, I would say, that folks using that internet technology, maybe have abused it. And likewise, if you think about the internet, there was a long time where people were saying, well, nobody's ever really going to buy things online because, they'll never trust it. Do you see a shift coming where, number one, as you say, it's the sort of economy gets disruptive, but more importantly, somebody can be opportunistic and take advantage of this technology to exclude others? We've talked about collusion, but do you see the potential for applications on top of the blockchain to become exclusionary?
Sure. And again, I very much agree with you that, rarely do we see a competition decision about the ICANN or any of the world organization running the internet. Although it could be interesting to discuss the infrastructure of the internet instead of just focusing on end cases. But it seems that we have no choice but to question the infrastructure of blockchain, because, to be very concrete, you may see an application abusing antitrust laws, but end of the day, that application will be running on top of a blockchain, meaning that the information and the transactions will become immutable. And should you want to enforce antitrust, or as a matter of fact, criminal law or IP, then you do need to impact the infrastructure of the blockchain. Otherwise, just going to one application and the CEO of that application won't do the trick. So you could, of course, enforce antitrust in the sense of making sure that the conditions to use that applications are fair. And I mean, all the rules that we know regarding self-preferencing and all that remains the exact same, regardless of whether it runs on top of a blockchain or outside of it. But it might be that in most cases, you will, again, need to impact the infrastructure and start challenging whether we want to maintain the core characteristics of blockchain such as they are, or if we want to develop new mechanisms and a new kind of infrastructure.
That's fascinating. Just to switch gears a little bit, Thibault, and usually on our podcast we talk about more personal, fun questions towards the end. Tell us something about yourself that people who just know you professionally may not know about you. Something
Sure.
interesting.
It's good that we do not start with this question, because last time I kind of asked a similar question to someone, or was asked a similar question. I said, which I will tell you, because I think this is not public information, that I was trained to become a professional tennis player. And in this conversation, it happens that the same was true for another person, and we ended up talking about tennis for quite a while instead of talking about blockchain and the SEC. But yes, this is my big secret, I guess. My best friend at the time became world number 18, I think, is still world number 30 or 40 as we speak. But is, I hope he's not listening to this podcast. Who knows? But he has not the best reputation. Let me put it this way. So I won't disclose his name. But French player, same year I was born. So it won't be too easy to find who he is.
Well, I can assure you, John and I did not train to be professional tennis players, so we would not have had the same problem on this podcast.
Did it, when you become a professional tennis player, do you get any training in how to talk to referees?
No, never. So you get used to it, because if you are a good player in I don't know, I think it depends on your level again, but if you are a good tennis player when you are 12 or 13, then you will get referees, for the very first times. And of course, it is very frustrating, especially when you are 13, because if you see that the ball was in and the referee disagreed with you, then there is nothing you can do. And I got a lot of frustrations out of that, as you can expect. But no, unfortunately, you do not. And that is why I won't mention the name of my friend, because he never managed to talk to referees. And you have lots of YouTube compilations of him not managing that.
I was going to say, do you know how to say you have to be kidding me in French? I mean, is that a thing to say that in French?
Do you want me to say it?
That'd be great.
Tu te fous de ma gueule? Yeah, you would say that quite a lot. Yeah.
And do tennis skills ever translate into other game skills? I'm thinking maybe paddleball or something like that.
Yeah, so that I mean, I've played paddle only once, because as a tennis player, that is not something that you should do. I play tennis table though, also as a tennis player. So big gestures, and I'm not so good at that. But yeah, I suppose.
And how about table tennis?
Yeah, so table tennis, and so I've played table tennis with one of my new colleague who is actually training, I think, 3 hours every day. So he was much better than I was. And again, I play like a tennis player. So I will stand 3 meters behind the table and, try my best not to give any point away, but I'm incapable of, attacking the ball as I should.
I think there is a possibility that you may be the top-ranked antitrust lawyer tennis player when we do our next rankings, both in regular tennis and perhaps also in table tennis. Although we'll have to explore that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that. But if I may, if any of the listeners are coming to Amsterdam and are, wants to play with me, we could definitely arrange for a game.
Are you sort of issuing an open challenge?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Come to Amsterdam and see if you can, knock down the champ.
Indeed, and if you're on Twitter, then we have to post the scoreboard, no matter what, unless I lose.
Well, you're supposed to have blockchain, so it'll be immutable.
Exactly.
Nobody can take it down.
Exactly. Yeah. We could do an NFT out of it.
All right. Well, let's go to our final segment called The Curious Hat.
And now it's time for The Curious Hat.
So in times when we're together, we actually sit in a room together and I have an actual hat, and in the actual hat are actual questions, and I hand the hat to the guest. The guest chooses a question out of the hat and we read that. Since we're not together today, I have a list of the questions that are numbered from 1 to 20, and I will ask you to choose a number and I will read the question that corresponds with that number.
Of course. And the choice is number 4.
Okay. Number 4. Okay.
I see you smiling, just for everyone to know that you are smiling right now. So
I smile after all these. It's an excellent choice.
Okay.
What is your favorite band and why?
So easy. So my favorite band is Pavement, a band from the 90s. They are, by the way, doing a tour all over the United States and Europe coming out next year. So I bought tickets for the show in Amsterdam and in Paris. So I'm incredibly excited about that. Why? Because in my opinion, this is the very first band in the history of music who managed to create a cooperation, which is, yes, the subject of my book, but a cooperation here between what is called slacker music. So, kind of college and university spirit music with more experimental rock music. So for that, it is by far, in my opinion, the best band who ever played music. And I've discovered the band 10 or 15 years ago, and I keep on playing that band on a weekly basis. Incredible band, Pavement. So you should check it out.
What's your favorite song? What song should folks listen to on Spotify or whatever they listen to songs?
Yeah, so if you start with Spotify, I would say Stereo is an amazing song. I would start with this one. Cut Your Hair is also another one. Out of this song, I've actually created a chart of haircut that you should have depending on the music that you play. So I do have a theory that if you play punk music, you should have short hair. If you play hard rock or stoner music, you should have long hair. So I've created that out of this particular song. But if you can access YouTube, there is a fantastic video. You enter Pavement, David Letterman, and they played there, and they couldn't give the word with an S at all. And for me, this is one of the best live performance ever recorded.
If you were to buy a Pavement ticket, would it be likely that you would be using blockchain technology?
I wish I could. And this is actually becoming something important in the ecosystem. And there are some platforms allowing you to upload a song onto a blockchain platform. And every time someone will play that out of the smart contract, you will get a tiny fraction and, award or compensation, which again, could compete with the big streaming platforms anytime soon. But unfortunately, for the tickets that I bought, this wasn't available. But it's coming, I'm sure.
Okay. Pavement, tennis, blockchain. Thank you for being with us, and we will see you next time on Our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam. a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.